We now come to the urgent question. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business and Trade if she will make a statement on what steps are being taken to restore public confidence in the Post Office Board and governance, following evidence taken at yesterday's Business and Trade Select Committee.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I sat there for 5 hours listening to all the evidence that was given to the Select Committee yesterday. There have now been several serious allegations made against the government, my department, and its officials by Henry Staunton. His most recent revelation is that there is an ongoing HR investigation that involves both him and the Post Office CEO, Nick Reed. I've got to say, as a former chair, I clearly found that statement to the Select Committee highly unprofessional. The fact that Nick Reed is being investigated is evidence that no one is untouchable and the Post Office culture is changing. An investigation is, of course, not evidence that allegations are accurate. While Nick Reed has cooperated fully, Mr Staunton tried to block the investigation that was looking at his conduct. It was this action, as well as his attempt to bypass the formal process to appoint a new director to the board, which led the Secretary of State to lose confidence in Mr Staunton. As was said in the Business and Trade Committee yesterday, board members felt so strongly about Mr Staunton's conduct that they were going to resign. It was right that the government decided to act. Mr Staunton has now made a series of allegations which we strongly reject. He is using the Nick Reed investigation to divert attention from the issues that the Select Committee were discussing about his dismissal. The allegations made are also proving to be a further distraction from the victims of this injustice. His central allegation is the government told him to slow down compensation payments. Not a single person backs him up on this claim. My officials are clear that they have never been instructed to do this. Post Office executives are clear that instruction was never passed on to them. We have provided a letter from June 2023 from my department to Mr Staunton telling him the opposite. His only evidence is a note of a conversation which is clearly about operational financing of the Post Office business. This is entirely different from compensation to sub-postmasters. The Permanent Secretary wrote recently to give her truthful account of what happened. We also released her office's contemporaneous note of that meeting. He alleged that the Secretary of State refused to apologise to him after he learnt of his dismissal from Sky News. This was not the case. He claimed there was pressure on Nick Reed to send a letter to the Justice Secretary. This was not the case. He claimed the Secretary of State told him that someone's got to take the rap of the Horizon scandal, and that was the reason for his dismissal. This was not the case. The Post Office faces unprecedented challenges and needs to work at pace to deliver compensation to the thousands of postmasters that fell victim to a flawed IT system, as well as continue the essential work to implement the necessary operational cultural changes needed within the business. As we have repeatedly said, Post Office governance is a priority for the government. That is why we acted swiftly to remove a chair about whom there were serious concerns and allegations, and why we are working at pace to appoint an interim chair. We, of course, recognise the seriousness of an investigation into individuals at the Post Office. I also recognise parliamentary and public concern and need to ensure there is confidence in the Post Office leadership. I'll therefore ask Post Office to provide me with the findings of the investigation once it is completed. However, it is right to wait for this investigation to conclude before making any further judgment.
I'm really disappointed, Mr Speaker, that the Secretary of State herself is not here. I thank the honourable member for Malton and Thirsk for everything he does for post offices, and I am happy to work with him going forward. Prominent Horizon victims are still saying compensation, or rather financial redress, is far too slow. Legal representatives of victims said yesterday that redress schemes are not working for victims. Too much lawyering going on, too much obfuscation. Lawyers say complete claims may have settled for less than they were entitled to and may need to be revisited. Neil Hudgell suggested August deadline targets will not be met and current compensation impasse could continue for another 1 or 2 years. Henry Staunton's claims persist. Why has the Prime Minister refused to back up the Secretary of State, refusing to repeat the claim that Staunton lied? This is the third time we've been here to find out about the circumstances of Mr Staunton's departure. Last time, the Secretary of State mentioned investigations into Staunton, but failed to reveal an 80-page investigation into the current CEO, Nick Reid. With all we have seen about the Secretary of State's past assurances being undermined, how can we trust her firm assurances now? Does the Secretary of State have faith in the Post Office Board, which is clearly in total disarray? There were even claims that CEO Nick Reid had threatened to resign over pay. Victims and the public have lost faith in the Post Office Board and governance. When over £1.2 billion of public money is being spent on financial redress, the taxpayer ought to have confidence that costs will not be driven up further by mismanagement. The evidence from yesterday's Business and Trade Committee shows that the public and victims have no reason to be confident, as incompetence and obfuscation has marred the process up until now. Submostras say redress schemes are not working. Victims agree. The lawyers say they're not working, and the former chair of Post Office says they are not working. Why should we trust the government? And what are you going to do to fix this?
Thank you, Speaker. Can I just say the Secretary of State is actually abroad at a WTO conference. Can I say, interesting her last points, and I can thank her for all she does on behalf of postmasters again, once again, say that from this dispatch box. Interesting yesterday that actually Mr Staunton, in his evidence, said he had no concerns around the speed of compensation, which I think she and I are quite astounded by that, because we have fought for years to try and improve the speed of compensation. I think that's one more, concern people might have around Mr Staunton's evidence, but that was clearly stated in one of his responses. It is absolutely right that we constantly seek to improve compensation and the speed of compensation and make sure it is full and fair and seen to be full and fair. One of the reasons I spent all day yesterday listening to the evidence given is to try and make sure that we are doing everything possible to accelerate compensation. Interesting conversations yesterday in the actual evidence session itself, listening to ideas from Mr Hudgell and others in terms of how we can accelerate compensation. That's something we are very keen to do. As she is aware, and the latest figures which I think were quoted yesterday at the Select Committee hearing, on the GLO scheme, for example, 106 full claims have been submitted, 104 offers have been made, 80 have been accepted without reference to the independent panel, which would tend to indicate offers made are fair. She will also recognise the announcements we made on Monday at the statement that we have introduced a £450,000 interim compensation figure when people submit their full claim for the overturned convictions scheme, and the fact we would provide an offer of 80%. We provide 80% of initial offer when an offer is made to claimants into the GLO scheme. Interesting also that Henry Staunton seemed to think his biggest concern around the compensation schemes was around the overturned convictions. He clearly said that yesterday, when she knows, and I think every member of this House knows, that we announced legislation on Monday and previously that will overturn convictions en masse, which is unprecedented. That is obviously the key to unlocking compensation. So I think for all those reasons, I don't think we should take Henry Staunton's evidence at face value.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Staunton continues to insist that he was told to delay compensation for the postmasters. But at the Select Committee yesterday, he said that the published notes of the meeting with Sarah Mumby were not contemporaneous, unlike his own. Can the Minister undertake to provide a contemporaneous note of that conversation to put this accusation to bed once and for all?
Minister.
Okay, I thank you for your question, and I work on the Select Committee. I think it's one thing to criticise ministers. I think it's entirely another to sully the good name of a civil servant. And Sarah Mumby has been very clear in her letter that she published on this matter that Mr Staunton is wrong. And she has also been very clear that she has contemporaneous notes of that meeting, and we will be publishing those notes, which absolutely clarify and back up the fact that Henry Staunton is wrong and Sarah Mumby is right.
We come to Shadow Minister Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What we saw yesterday was unedifying and at points a fiasco. Sub-postmasters watching will have rightly been dismayed and will have felt, if anything, that they were moving further away from getting justice. The ongoing conflict at the top of the post office and the failure of the government to get a grip is helping no one and is only further eroding trust in this process. And I do think the Secretary of State should reflect on how her approach to the news of recent weeks has only exacerbated that. We, and especially victims, have all had enough of the he said, she said. So does the Minister now recognise that the best way to end this is to fully clarify what the government has or hasn't said through an independent Cabinet Office investigation? Can I also pick up on some of the worrying evidence given yesterday by Carl Creswell, Director of the Business Resilience in the Business Department, where he said of the financial provisions set aside for Horizon compensation that he personally thinks we will end up spending more money in compensation overall than the 1 billion figure which was modelled at an earlier stage. This is incredibly serious. So can I ask the Minister, does he share this view held by one of his senior civil servants, and if so, what conversations has he had with government colleagues, and will he see this being reflected in next week's budget? Can the Minister clarify whether he or the Secretary of State were aware of that Nick Reed was also under investigation, as was allegedly stated in the 80-page document referred to by Henry Staunton in yesterday's Select Committee hearing, and specifically in response to me during an urgent question on the 29th of January, the Minister said that Henry Staunton's sacking was due not to the falling out that I referred to, but, I quote, about very serious governance issues relating to the person who headed the board of the organisation, which are obviously confidential human resources issues. Can the Minister confirm if he had sight of the confidential human resources report that was referred to in yesterday's Select Committee hearing, and if so, why was he selective in his update to this House? Finally, it's very important to make sure that we restore trust by urgently bringing forward legislation. So I hope that rather than yesterday's unseemly events, our focus can return to making sure we exonerate the sub-postmasters and deliver the recompense that they rightly deserve.
When she says I was selective about what I said, is she accusing me of being economical with the truth? Because I take exception to that point. I think it's absolutely wrong that anybody in this House would disclose information around an investigation that has not concluded and where the individuals concerned, the presumption of innocence must apply. If you think I should come to this, if she thinks I should come to this House and talk about those kind of sensitive, confidential matters, I think she doesn't understand how corporate world works. I'm answering her question. I certainly will not. In terms of being unedifying,
it's still a debate.
In terms of being unedifying, I think I did find it unedifying, but around one single person. I think everybody else who gave evidence yesterday was clear there was no sense ever of trying to slow down compensation, nor do I think that she is right by saying that postmasters are further away from getting compensation. Quite the opposite. And I think to imply that is basically bringing around questions around the compensation scheme could lead people not coming forward. We welcome the fact that 1,000 more people have come forward since the ITV series. People are closer to compensation, not further away. And the actions we are taking, both in terms of the Compensation Advisory Board, in terms of the overturning of convictions, in terms of the Horizon Shortfall scheme, which is nearly completed, and the GLO scheme, all those things are moving on. If she wants to end he said, she said, perhaps she should end it, because we want to move on and pay compensation. In terms of the £1 billion, is she saying it's serious if we have no cap on compensation? I don't think that's serious at all. Of course we have no cap on compensation. So the £1 billion is a maximum budget. If that budget needs to be increased, it should be. If she is saying we shouldn't increase it, if people deserve more, I think she should put that on record. But I think that would be an entirely irresponsible thing to do. So I think on all counts in what she said, and every time I've dealt with this matter over the dispatch box with shadow ministers, it has been constructive and collaborative, and I do resent the tone she's taken in this particular case.
Can I just say, in fairness to the Minister, he has come here on more occasions than anybody else I have known, and he has absolutely ensured that the House has been kept informed. I must say, he goes without question. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. May I commend the Minister not only for the consistent and compassionate approach he's taken to this matter, but also for his attendance at the session yesterday that lasted for 5 hours, and he was there for the greater part of it. And he's quite right to say that much of what we heard yesterday was a real distraction from the key objective of, I think, the government and the committee in making sure that there is speedy compensation to our postmasters. But it was clear that the former chairman and possibly the chief executive exhibited limitations in their role and were perhaps unsuitable for the role to which they were appointed. So I just wonder if there are any broader lessons that we might deduce in terms of how we go about recruitment for publicly owned organisations such as the Post Office.
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his question and for his work on the Select Committee, and he's a doughty champion in this area and many others that relate to the Select Committee's work. I do think there are some lessons we need to learn from this. I think the Post Office certainly does require the right kind of skills, the right kind of person to turn it round. That is clearly work in progress, and I don't think people will be confident that is happening until it's actually happened. Words are no longer enough. We need actions, be it in terms of the turnaround of the Post Office itself or indeed the compensation schemes.
Chairman of the Select Committee, Liam Bunn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful that the Minister joined us for most of the 5 hours of hearings yesterday, but he will know as well as I do that what we saw yesterday was complete chaos at the top of the Post Office, when what we needed is a clarity of purpose about paying redress fast and fair. Not a single witness yesterday said that they were satisfied with the speed of any one of the three processes. In fact, the lawyers for the claimants said that this may now take 1 to 2 years in order to complete the payment of redress, and we heard evidence of offers being made that were frankly insultingly low. That is true across each of the three schemes. We also heard, and this is what actually worried me most, that the Post Office Chief Executive had not met regularly with the Secretary of State, nor received a clear written instruction to accelerate every single one of the three schemes. There were no deadlines, there were no targets, and there were no incentives to get the redress schemes done and dusted. Mr Deputy Speaker, that is not good enough. So will the Minister again reflect, when he brings his bill forward to the House, on the need to eliminate the Post Office from this process to the maximum possible extent and ensure that there are a legally binding set of timescales under which claims are given the information they need, processed, offers made and offers settled? Because we cannot go on like this.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do think the chaos was caused by one individual. I sat through the whole session, and the bits I wasn't actually in the room with him, I was watching it on television. I think it's absolutely right for people to be able to say they're not satisfied with the speed of compensation. I have said that time and time again from this dispatch box, and we're keen to accelerate it and make sure it is fast and fair. We are aware of the recommendations from my right honourable friend, member for Durham North, about an appeal mechanism for some of the schemes where people feel the compensation is too low. We are looking at and continue to look at that. Always, in every compensation scheme I have dealt with, the RBS GRG scheme and the Lloyds HBOS scheme, compensations schemes are always too slow because of some of the complexity. We heard some good suggestions yesterday about how we remove some of that complexity, which I'm very keen to do. We did hear some positive remarks from the individuals concerned, some of the solicitors, for example, and from the Post Office on the fixed sum awards, the 650,000 for the overturned convictions, and the 75,000 for the GLO, how that was reducing the amount of disclosure that was required, which is one of the limiting factors, which should mean the timescales that some people put on the table at 1-2 years should be rapidly reduced, and I'm very much keen to build on that work. In terms of the CEO, I meet with the CEO every month, as he said to the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman yesterday. We speak about the need to accelerate compensation every single time, as he confirmed yesterday. We do have targets in terms of when we want to pay compensation by. August on the GLO cases, all cases ideally by the end of this year. As we heard yesterday, there's 1,000 new claimants come forward since the ITV series. That does make it difficult to put deadlines on it. I'm aware he wants a legally binding target. I'm very happy to discuss that with him. But just in the context, we've just removed one legally binding target because not everything within this process is within our gift.
Dean Russell.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I know my honourable friend on the front bench has an absolute passion to get this right and right the wrongs of the past. And so would he agree with me that we must do all that we can to ensure that the sub-postmasters who were victims in this awful situation of the Horizon scandal exonerated and compensated fully, fairly and with absolute haste?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for the work he's done as one of my predecessors on this particular issue. I know he was as keen to make sure that is the case as I am, to make sure that full and fair compensation is paid to all individuals. As I said before, there is no limit to the amount of compensation that we will set aside to make sure people are compensated properly for this horrendous scandal.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In the week that we heard that more than 250 postmasters whose lives and reputations were damaged by Post Office Limited had died before they could get justice, yesterday we found another layer of Post Office Limited's organisational dysfunction. Now, on the 19th of February, the Secretary of State came to this House and informed the House of bullying accusations against Mr Staunton, only for us to find out yesterday that those accusations related to another individual entirely. So could I ask the Minister, for whom I have the greatest of respect, not just for the manner in which he goes about his business in regard to the Horizon scandal, did the Secretary of State mislead the House by telling members that Mr Staunton was under wider investigation for bullying? And secondly, will the Minister now respond positively to requests from the Scottish Government and the Northern Irish Executive to reconsider introducing legislation which can lead to a swift UK-wide exoneration for postmasters affected?
Minister. Well, can I thank you for his question. Just to be clear, Mr Staunton, we terminated Mr Staunton's role as chair of the Post Office not because of bullying accusations, and there was an 80-page report which he referred to yesterday. That's not a report I have read, but 80-page report. He freely admitted within the evidence session yesterday he was named within that report. To what extent, I do not. Well, that's what he says. It's to a very minor extent. I don't know that. I don't think he knows that. And I think we should wait for the investigation to conclude before we make a judgment on that. But the point was not about that allegation itself. The point is, as he admitted yesterday, he interfered with the investigation. That's what he did. And that is unacceptable. And I think if we hadn't acted in that way, I think he would be, and others would be, calling us to account for why we didn't act when somebody tries to suspend or interfere with an investigation into somebody's conduct, his own conduct. In terms of legislation, I'm aware of the Scottish Government's position on this, and indeed the Northern Irish Government's position on this, and of course we'll continue to discuss that with them. They are separate in terms of some of the devolved issues around the judicial system in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's the reason we've done it differently. We're very happy to continue our dialogue on it.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to pay tribute. In my time as a PPS in the department, I know the determination of the Minister and of the Secretary of State to get compensations to these very wrong postmasters as quickly as possible. In yesterday's Select Committee, Mr Staunton spoke about lobbying for a pay rise for Mr Reid, which I know must have been quite galling to many of those sub-postmasters. The Minister was reported as refusing this pay rise. Can I ask him what sort of pay rise Mr Staunton thought would be a fair, equitable agreement at that time?
Minister.
Well, I think on two occasions, Mr Staunton sought to lobby, or did lobby for a pay increase for Mr Reid. He sought to double the overall package of Mr Reid on those occasions.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Further to the last question, the committee meeting yesterday was bizarre in many ways. 5 hours long. And rarely the people who were in front of the inquiry actually had to swear on the Holy Bible. That's how bad it was, really. But the recently dismissed former chairman revealed a number of things, which was quite alarming. First of all, he revealed that the current chief executive is under investigation. Perhaps, Minister, you can explain why we weren't aware of that. But secondly, he revealed that the current chief executive had threatened to resign on more than 4 occasions, not because of the lack of progress for any financial redress to the postmasters or postmistresses, but because he said his wages were too low. And he also said in his comments, and this is the chief executive, that he was proud that he had a hardship fund for workers in the post office. Can a minister explain or clarify or otherwise if there's been an approach by anyone on behalf of the current chief executive for a pay rise and what the response was?
Minister.
Can I just put on record, just correct a record from earlier? In the response to the chair of the Select Committee, I said the fixed sum award is £650,000. It's £600,000. So to clarify that particular point. I think in terms of the investigation, I think it would be wrong to disclose an investigation into somebody's conduct before that investigation had concluded. I think it would be extraordinary to do that in any work context, be it the public or private sector. In terms of hardship fund, I'm very happy to have this conversation with him aside from this. If he's talking about the post office paying salaries to postmasters, if that's what his point was around, well, most postmasters, of course, are self-employed, not paid a salary directly, and have a number of different streams of income into their businesses. They are businesses in their own right, of course. So I think but there is a hardship fund there in certain cases for certain postmasters in certain situations.
Sir Oliver Hill.
Can I echo the comments about the Minister and his assiduous work on this issue, both as a backbencher and now as the Minister? Does he agree with me that perhaps it's necessary to look at how many people are working on the compensation schemes on the post office side? I've raised this with him before. Of course, it's expert work, a lot of it, but if anything can be done to build the resource, that would be helpful, particularly for my constituent who we've discussed before. On the point about disciplinary proceedings and grievance procedures, isn't it normal that they are private until the point when a decision is made?
Minister.
Well, he's absolutely right on the last point, and he clearly understands these situations very well. They are, of course, they should be kept confidential, and that's why I think it was highly unprofessional of Mr Staunton to say what he said yesterday. In terms of his earlier point, which I can't remember what it was now. Getting more lawyers in. More lawyers, yes, absolutely. From a 70 position. We absolutely are committed to making sure we have the resources available to settle compensation claims quickly. It's certainly a final note I took away from yesterday's session to make when Adelshaw got our numbers of individuals looking after compensations from their end, although they are turning around the offers increasingly quickly. We're now 85% of cases, responses to full claims happen within 40 days. There has been improvement. We are keen to make sure that whoever part in the process has the resources it needs to pay compensation fairly and quickly.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Surely what we saw yesterday was a glimpse of senior management in the Post Office which is now completely dysfunctional. And as such, it is difficult to see how anyone can have confidence in their administration of the various compensation schemes. So would not it be a sensible first step to restore confidence in that most important national institution, the Post Office, to take all role for them out of the administration of the compensation schemes and to appoint an independent commissioner? Because nothing starts to get better for the Post Office until these schemes are successfully delivered and wound up.
Well, thank you for this question. I mean, I think what you actually heard, what I actually saw, was a dysfunctional former chair of the Post Office. That's what we saw. Interesting that he said, in his point about compensation schemes, he actually said at one point during his evidence he had no concerns about the speed of delivery of the HSS, which was extraordinary, I think, because I have many concerns about that. In terms of, I hear loud and clear calls from across the House in terms of the role Post Office are playing in compensation schemes. These are sensitive matters because there are people employed within Post Office managing the compensation schemes and administering the compensation schemes, but we hear loud and clear his point. We are looking at this, and but also to reassure him, all three schemes have independence in them. Independent panel in the HSS, an independent panel and a reviewer in terms of Sir Ross Cranston on the GLO scheme, and independence in the overturned convictions, and Sir Gary Hickenbottom, both of which those latter people are retired High Court judges. That should give claimants and him, hopefully, some confidence these schemes will operate properly.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend has referred to Mr Staunton, and it seems that he had serious character defects. How is it that he was ever appointed in the first place, and who was it who provided the character references and oversaw that appointment process? And can we have an inquiry into that?
Minister.
Well, thankfully not me. I mean, Mr Staunton, I have nothing against Mr Staunton personally. He had a very strong track record as a chair of various large organisations, as he was saying yesterday. I think this is a specific organisation that has specific challenges, and I think we'd all agree with that. Interesting, the evidence from Ben Tidswell yesterday, with the Senior Independent Director, who felt Mr Staunton's his approach and his behaviour changed in November last year and became far more erratic, were his words. And I don't know the reason for that specifically, although Mr Tidswell suggested some reasons yesterday, but I think whatever reason, his recent conduct is not consistent with remaining chair of the Post Office. That's why we decided to act.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I just want to thank the Minister for his work in this area. He's been assiduous in the attention to detail. Can't say the same of the Secretary of State. But nevertheless, yesterday was unedifying. And we are sick to death of he said, she said business. We're not interested. But there were two witnesses yesterday, both who took the oath, and they spoke to the same issue as to whether Mr Reid had ever tendered his resignation or threatened to. Now, there were totally conflicting evidence from two people. They both can't be right, so I kind of suggest that one of them may be a little bit economical with the truth. But from Dr Neil Hudgell, the message came very loud and clear that these schemes are way over-engineered, far too bureaucratic, and that's led to the delay getting the money out the door. I've got to correct the Minister, there's only 20% of the fund actually out the door as yet. Exactly. So, we've got to speed this up. And can I ask him, finally, just to take on board the words of the predecessor Select Committee, the Bay Select Committee, in February 2022, which said the best way through this is to remove the Post Office. from the system. Now, it may be too late to do that, but my goodness, wasn't that committee right in saying that? And can we find ways to relegate the role of the post office, because it's the only way we're going to get justice for the postmasters, which is quite ultimately, that's what this is about. It's getting them compensated.
Yeah. Minister.
Well, I totally agree with his final point, and a number of points you raised. And I think it's fair to say on the compensation schemes, you know, the old phrase, if you were going there, you wouldn't start from here. And I think Sir Win Williams has said that. But the best way now, when you're going through hell, keep going. And we've got to improve the schemes we've got. Interesting point about the post office. You'll have heard what I said earlier. I think the fixed sum awards do take the post office out of these schemes completely, because there's no disclosure required for those, of course. In terms of the resignation, again, I thought it was extraordinary that a chair would disclose confidential conversations he's had with the chief executive. Confidential conversations and private conversations. I've got to say, put on record here, Mr Reid has never tendered his resignation to me or the Secretary of State. So I think in terms of the nature of those conversations, others would be better to comment than me, but I don't think it was right that Mr Staunton commented at all on it. On the Secretary of State, I've got to say, I can assure him, she has given me 100% support in everything I've done trying to address these matters. 100% support. And I accept the fact what Neil Hudgell said, and I spoke to him afterwards, and we've spoken before about them being over-engineered. He suggested some ways to try and accelerate compensation yesterday. We, of course, are looking at those and seeing what the best way is to make it sure it is not over-engineered, and in fact it delivers rapid, fair outcomes as quickly as possible.
Ian Paisley.
Mr Deputy Speaker, my primary interest in this is to see compensation payments made expeditiously, and that applies across the entirety of the United Kingdom and in Northern Ireland in particular, where I've been lobbied very directly by a number of those sub-postmasters who were treated so vile in this process. On the official report of the 10th of January, the Minister told me from the dispatch box, when I asked him that he would make sure no delays would be allowed whatsoever, he affirmed that it's exactly the Government's intention. Can I ask the Minister to reaffirm that there'll be no delays allowed, irrespective of the devolution settlements in Northern Ireland, that because no devolution minister was involved in this, no devolved court was involved in this at that time, and these payments will be made, and our sub-postmasters will not have to wait a day longer than anyone else.
Minister.
Well, thank you for this question. I'm very keen to make sure that happens. I met with the Justice Minister in Northern Ireland a few days ago, virtually, to discuss these particular matters. I know their preference is to legislate UK-wide. We don't think that's a right approach, but we'll continue to work with the Northern Ireland administration to make sure they can deliver the right legislation or right process to make sure that compensation is paid. It is very clear that once convictions are overturned, anywhere in the United Kingdom, they enter exactly the same compensation scheme, can get rapid compensation using the fixed sum award of £600,000, or go through the full assessment process. We're determined to make that process quicker, easier and fairer. I'm very happy to work with him to make sure that is the case.
Dame Neil Griffith.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Roger. I thank the Minister for the work he is doing on the Horizon scandal and for answering my letter concerning a constituent. But in that letter, he's confirmed to me that former post office clerks and those working for a franchise who lost money, jobs and reputation through the Horizon scandal are not eligible under the current schemes for compensation. So will he now look into ways that they could be included in a compensation scheme?
Minister.
Well, can I thank her for a question and for representing her constituents so effectively. Very keen to have a continued conversation with her. All the schemes that have been established thus far require a contractual relationship between the post office and the individual. I know that's not the case with her constituent. Of course, we've had a number of members of this House who have addressed this particular issue. We, of course, will continue to look at it.
Kirsten Arthur.
Minister, whether it's those like my constituent Roger, a former postmaster whose case is one which certainly needs reviewed, or constituents in communities like Clarkson and Neilston who've seen most recent post office closures in East Renfrewshire, or the brilliant postmasters who are operating locally, none of them deserve this mess, and it is turning into a very regrettable circus to all these who are looking in from the outside. So I wonder what assurances he can give me today that this won't be allowed to divert or distract from a really genuine focus on both the swiftest possible resolution and delivering a sustainable future for the Post Office?
Minister.
Well, can I thank her for her point and representing her constituents so well? Yes, absolutely. We understand this is distracting from some of the work, or potentially could distract from some of the work to make sure not just that we make right the wrongs of the past, but also the Post Office has a strong future, as she puts it. Totally agree with that. We think the Post Office does have a strong future. And although revenue streams have been affected by changing consumer habits, of course, in terms of how and where they acquire certain things or access certain services, we do think things like the banking framework, which we encourage the Post Office to be more ambitious in its negotiations with the banks in terms of the remuneration that flows from that into postmasters, but also things like parcel hubs, which are an opportunity for the future. We believe that the Post Office has a strong brand and a strong future, and we're very keen to make sure we support their efforts to make sure that future is bright for all postmasters.
Kevin Judge.
Thank you. Can I declare my interest as a member of the Horizon Advisory Board and say welcome back to the Minister? I think he should bring his sleeping bag, actually. How often is here? Can I say to him, I was at the 5-hour marathon yesterday, and can I say I was totally unconvinced by Henry Stroughton's accusations around the allegations of delaying compensation. And like the member of Christchurch, I wondered why he was ever appointed in the first place, or for that matter, to any board for that matter. But one thing he did raise, which came to the public domain, is that the Chief Executive is under investigation following this 80-page report. He knows that culture is rotten at the Post Office, and it's important that this cloud is lifted very quickly. I accept he can't talk about that individual, that would be wrong. But can I ask him, when the Secretary of State came before us on the 19th of February, did she know and did he know that the Nick Reid was actually under investigation? And can I ask him directly, is it true that the former HR director who wrote that report has left the Post Office with a settlement, and is there an NDA agreement around that settlement?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to come to this dispatch box on any time I'm required, or if there's a need to do so, which is, as he says, is quite often right at the moment. I was aware, in terms of the investigation, both in terms of Mr Reid and Mr Staunton, that wasn't the reason the Secretary of State decided to part company with the chair. It was about interfering with the investigation. He asked some questions about the HR director that I don't know. I'm very happy to look into those matters and come back to him.
Christian Jardy.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that everything we are seeing, everything we are hearing about the Post Office inquiry is further undermining the confidence of those people who were affected by the Horizon scandal. And even though 1,000 extra, as the Minister has said, have come forward, they have no more confidence than anybody else in the governance of the Post Office. One of them, my constituent, had been with the Post Office almost 20 years and was about to be given redundancy and was asked to take over a post office, a sub-post office, for 2 months to make up the 20 years. During those 2 months, she got embroiled in the Horizon scandal. She wasn't charged because her managers within the Post Office pleaded on her behalf, but she did lose her redundancy, and she is now completely confused about where she stands and has no faith in the governance to fix it out. So would the Minister be prepared to meet me to discuss this so that I can give her some assurance of the fact that her case will be dealt with?
Well, yes, of course I would. Very happy to meet with her and her constituents if you would like me to do that. The place for her to go is the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. It sounds, from what she's said, and we're happy to look at that particular situation. Of the 2,417 people who applied to the original scheme, 100% have had offers. 84% of those people have accepted those offers. So she can be assured there will be fairness, and we're looking to make sure that it is fair and seen to be fair. The other schemes also are delivering outcomes quickly, more quickly than they were. 106 claims into the GLO scheme. 80 have been, those offers have been accepted. The overturned conviction, the £600,000 fixed sum award. I think the fact that 1,000 people have come forward for compensation since the ITV series indicates people do have some confidence they will be compensated fairly, but we absolutely understand we have work to do to make sure people feel that way across the board.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister? The Minister has been incredibly honest, forthright in all of his answers, and we have every faith in the Minister in relation to his conduct and how this has been done and all things that he's brought to this chamber, so we thank him for that. As a local elected representative, I'm aware that we are accountable to our electorate. How can the Minister ensure that those who are paid by government funds are accountable in the same way? And what more can be done to hold those decision makers to the very extent proper account as well? Thank you.
Minister.
Yeah, well, I thank him for his contribution as ever. In terms of the issue of government funds, I guess he's referring to individuals within the post office, executives within the post office. Clearly, it's our responsibility. We're the single shareholder. We have a representative on the board, Lorna Grattan, who I have a great deal of confidence in from UK GI. I think it's fair to say our department, our officials have learnt from this process, have learnt a lot from what's gone on, and it's quite right that we do. Mistakes have happened. We should be clear about that and apologise for for those mistakes, what the contribution of those mistakes was to this scandal. So I'm very keen to make sure that continued accountability. We have set up a public inquiry at significant expense to the taxpayer. That was called for across this House. It is taking its evidence in public. The public can see what's happening in terms of that inquiry. It will conclude by the end of this year, report next year, and we'll have a lot more answers to his question and make sure that we have the accountability, not just for the Post Office executives going forward, but Post Office executives of previous years.
Order. That concludes proceedings on the urgent question. Can I thank the Minister for his now daily appearance and also the opposition front bench. If members would leave the chamber quietly if they wish to do so, please. Thank you, and we now come to the statement on Ukraine. Sir Andrew Mitchell.